History often hides its greatest kingdoms in the shadows, and few are more overlooked than the Kanem Bornu Empire, a state that endured for more than 1,000 years around the fertile waters of Lake Chad. While Europe stumbled through the Middle Ages and Asia built dynasties that rose and fell, in the heart of Africa a powerful kingdom grew, adapted, and thrived. The Kanem Bornu Empire is one of the longest-lasting states in African history, yet few today even know its name. This is the story of how it began, how it expanded into greatness, how its rulers combined war, trade, and faith, and how it survived where so many other empires fell. The roots of Kanem Bornu stretch back to around the 9th century. The land around Lake Chad had long been a crossroads, where savanna met desert, and where rivers and caravan routes brought together nomads, farmers, and traders. The region was not barren, it was rich with possibilities. Lake Chad itself was a lifeline, its waters supporting fishing, agriculture, and grazing. Around its shores lived a variety of peoples, including the Kanembu, the Sao, and later the Bornu. From these diverse groups, the seeds of empire began to take root. The Kanembu, in particular, are often credited with laying the foundations of the first kingdom in this region, known as Kanem. The early rulers of Kanem were part of the Dugawa dynasty. They established their power by controlling trade routes across the Sahara. Salt, copper, and horses came south, while ivory, ostrich feathers, slaves, and textiles moved northward. The wealth generated from this trade gave Kanem the resources to grow, but it also made the kingdom a target. Nomadic groups from the desert, as well as rival powers in the savannah, constantly tested its strength. Yet the rulers of Kanem adapted, building alliances, raising armies, and creating a centralized state. One of the great transformations of Kanem came in the 11th century, when Islam spread into the region. Trade brought more than goods, it brought ideas. Muslim merchants and scholars traveling from North Africa introduced the faith, and over time, the rulers of Kanem adopted it. This was more than a religious choice, it was a political strategy. By embracing Islam, the kings of Kanem tied themselves to the wider Muslim world, gaining prestige and legitimacy. The title of Mai was used for the kings, and one of the most influential of these was Mai Humai, who reigned around 1068. He is remembered as the first ruler of Kanem to convert to Islam. His decision reshaped the culture of the empire, bringing Islamic law, literacy in Arabic, and ties to centers of learning like Cairo and Tripoli. From this moment on, Islam would become a defining feature of Kanem Bornu's identity. The empire reached its first great height under the Sefua dynasty, which replaced the earlier rulers and expanded the kingdom's power. For centuries, the Sefua ruled Kanem, building an empire that stretched across the lands around Lake Chad and deep into the Sahara. By the 13th century, Kanem was at its peak, controlling trade routes and vast stretches of territory. One of its greatest kings was Mai Dunama Dabalemi, who reigned in the early 13th century. He was a devout Muslim known for building mosques, spreading Islam, and even waging wars he considered jihads. Under his leadership, Kanem expanded far into the Sahel, conquering neighboring peoples and securing tribute from them. His armies included cavalry, skilled in desert warfare, and his empire was respected as one of the great powers of the region. But success often sows the seeds of difficulty. The very expansion that made Kanem rich also created strains. The empire stretched so wide that it became hard to govern effectively. Rival groups resisted, desert nomads raided, and internal tensions grew. By the late 14th century, Kanem faced a crisis. Invasions by the Balala people from the east struck at the heart of the empire. These fierce warriors challenged Kanem's dominance, defeating its armies and forcing its rulers into retreat. By the end of the 14th century, the once great empire of Kanem seemed on the brink of collapse. Yet this was not the end. Instead, it was the beginning of a remarkable transformation. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the rulers of Kanem shifted their power base westward, into the land of Bornu, located on the western shores of Lake Chad. This relocation was both a retreat and a rebirth. In Bornu, the empire found fertile lands, defensible positions, and new opportunities. From this base, the empire would re-emerge, not as Kanem, but as Kanem Bornu, a state that blended the legacies of both regions. It was in Bornu that the empire experienced its true golden age, particularly under the leadership of Mai Idris Aluma in the late 16th century. Idris Aluma is remembered as one of Africa's greatest kings, a ruler whose vision, reforms, and military skill revitalized Kanem Bornu and gave it centuries more of life. Aluma was both a warrior and a statesman. He reorganized the army, introducing firearms that he acquired through contact with the Ottoman Turks and North African traders. His cavalry remained the backbone of his forces, but now they were supported by musketeers and artillery, giving him a technological edge over his rivals. He waged campaigns across the region, defeating the Sao, the Bulala, and other groups that had long threatened the empire. His conquests expanded Kanem Bornu's influence, restoring its dominance over trade routes and securing tribute from surrounding peoples. But Idris Aluma's greatness was not only on the battlefield. He was a reformer who strengthened the internal foundations of the empire. He introduced a legal system based on Islamic law, bringing order and justice. He encouraged scholarship, built mosques, and promoted Islam as the unifying identity of his people. Yet he was also pragmatic. He respected local customs and found ways to blend them with Islamic principles, ensuring that his rule was both firm and flexible. Aluma also promoted agriculture and trade. He built roads, dug wells, and supported irrigation projects, improving food production and connecting his empire more closely. His encouragement of long-distance trade ensured that Kanem Bornu remained plugged into the wider world, linking it to markets in North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Under Idris Aluma, Kanem Bornu became a true superpower of Central Africa. Travelers and chroniclers from outside the empire wrote about its wealth, its organization, and the strength of its rulers. The empire's reputation spread across the Sahara, cementing its place in the history of Africa. Yet, as always, time brought challenges. After Aluma's death, his successors tried to maintain his legacy, but the pressures of history weighed heavily. The empire endured, but cracks began to appear. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Kanem Bornu was still powerful, but internal struggles and external pressures weakened it. Nomadic groups, rival states, and shifting trade routes all eroded its strength. The rise of Atlantic trade also drew wealth away from the trans-Saharan routes that had long sustained Kanem Bornu. By the 19th century, Kanem Bornu faced new threats, particularly from the Fulani Jihad, led by Usman Dan Fodio. This Islamic reform movement swept across West Africa, toppling old states and creating the Sokoto Caliphate. Kanem Bornu resisted fiercely, managing to hold on to independence longer than many neighboring kingdoms, but the pressures mounted. By the late 19th century, European colonial powers arrived in Africa, carving up the continent in the infamous Scramble for Africa. Kanem Bornu, weakened by centuries of conflict, could not withstand this final storm. It was absorbed into the territories claimed by Britain, France, and Germany. The 1,000-year-old empire had finally come to an end, yet the legacy of Kanem Bornu remains. It was one of the longest-lasting empires in African history, surviving from the 9th century until the 19th century. Its rulers were pioneers of state-building, blending African traditions with Islamic principles. Its scholars contributed to the intellectual life of the region. Its traders connected Africa to the wider world, and its kings demonstrated both military might and administrative wisdom. Idris Aluma stands as one of Africa's greatest rulers, a leader whose vision kept the empire strong for centuries. Even today, the memory of Kanem Bornu endures among the peoples of Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Niger, whose ancestors were once part of this remarkable state. The story of Kanem Bornu is more than just the story of a kingdom. It is the story of resilience, adaptation, and the ability of African societies to create lasting institutions. While empires rose and fell elsewhere, Kanem Bornu endured, reinventing itself time and again, from Kanem to Bornu, from near collapse to golden age. Its history challenges the myths that Africa was without states, without culture, or without history before colonialism. On the contrary, Kanem Bornu shows us that Africa was home to some of the world's most enduring civilizations. For 1,000 years, the empire of Kanem Bornu stood by the waters of Lake Chad, a beacon of power and faith in the heart of Africa. It deserves to be remembered not as a footnote, but as one of the great stories of human history.